What's going on, guys? I missed out on doing a video yesterday, so let's start this right here. Mstr stock yesterday announced another Bitcoin purchase, and they acquired almost 3,500 Bitcoin for $285 million at a price of $82,618 per Bitcoin, now bringing them up to 531,644 Bitcoin. And I will leave this article down below for you guys if you want to look more into it, but this is nice to see after they skipped a buy last week. There was a little bit of fear that they were going to skip this week as well, which is not the case. Now I want to pull up MSTR on the chart. It actually looks better than Bitcoin. It is not facing a death cross yet, as Bitcoin has, and we're still facing our descending trend, our descending channel here, and I believe we're at a pretty important point. We either need to break out of this zone that we're basically at here, this roughly 315. We need to break this and hold. It has been a support in the past as well as a resistance. You get a reaction on a break and you get a drop when you don't successfully clear it and hold. So in my opinion, MSTR is either going to break and hold this 315 or it's going to find it as resistance once more, possibly along with this descending trend, this descending resistance. We're going to retest some lows. It kind of depends on the market. It depends on Bitcoin. Now I want to talk about Bitcoin on the chart, and then we're going to look over an article explaining how it's much different than past cycles. Now, first off, it did look like we got a nice reaction out of the bullish divergence. We saw the RSI picking up while the price was continuing down. And one thing that's really nice to see is we did break our descending trend, this falling wedge. We have seen breakouts in the past that were false, only ending up with the shadow above this trend. Well, we now have candles above it. We do have something worrying here, this death cross. But let me show you guys something interesting that we have seen throughout this cycle. Past death crosses this cycle have actually marked the bottom. Since the 2022 bear market crypto winter, we have seen 3 death crosses now. We saw one death cross back here in 2023, late 2023, which essentially marked the bottom within days. We saw yet another death cross back during the Mt. Gox fear, which brought Bitcoin down to 49K. People thought the cycle was over here. We got a death cross, and that actually did pretty much mark within days of the bottom. Here's our next death cross. Is this 74K going to be the bottom? If past death crosses are any indicator, this might be the bottom. Bitcoin is now surprisingly only 22% down from its all-time high. At the worst point of this pullback, we're looking at about a 33% drop from all-time high, which is very interesting, which is very telling considering our last pullback during the Mt. Gox fear was roughly exactly the same, about a 33% drop. If you had a time machine to go back during all this drama, during all this fear with Mt. Gox, which brought Bitcoin down to 49K. Hindsight is everything. Back during this Mt. Gox fear, people thought Bitcoin was going to go a lot lower. It went down to 49K and then recovered massively, hit new all-time highs. Some people looked back at this point and took advantage and accumulated, knowing that there was so much fear, knowing that Bitcoin suffers from these pullbacks time to time, and knowing that Bitcoin will go higher over the long term. People that took advantage during these times are still up massively. People that bought in during the hype, people that bought Bitcoin when it was hitting new all-time highs, when there was euphoria, when there was excitement, those people, if they only bought recently, they're down. In the end, I do think this is a time to take advantage of Bitcoin. Of course, we can retest some lows. Of course, we could potentially come down to 75K again, even go lower. Sometimes when you're feeling negative about Bitcoin, it helps to zoom out on a bigger chart. Here's the monthly. You can see that on the long term, if you are patient, if you accumulate Bitcoin during the bad times, you will make it out the other side a much richer person. Now, I wanted to end it with this article. Bitcoin is acting notably different from prior market pullbacks and wants to go higher if macro obstacles are removed. And here's some interesting tidbits from Bitwise CEO Matt Hogan. He brings up that Bitcoin has never outperformed the stock market during a correction, during a full-on market correction. The world is unraveling and Bitcoin is trading above $80,000. If that doesn't give you confidence in its staying power, I don't know what will. Very well said. And he points out that this is a part of Bitcoin growing up. Matt Hogan believes that Bitcoin's recent performance is a sign of maturity. And in past cycles, Bitcoin being such a risk asset, it would always get crushed when stocks sell off, right? Dropping much more than stocks. Hogan argues that Bitcoin's hedge asset narrative is gaining traction. More corporations and institutions are buying Bitcoin. More governments begin to hold it as a strategic reserve. It is not as speculative as it once was. That's all I got for you guys. How do you feel about Bitcoin so far this cycle? We've had some good times, we've had some rough times, but Bitcoin's performance has been quite interesting in recent months, considering the performance of the stock market. Like Matt Hogan said, Bitcoin is maturing, which comes with its positives and negatives. Less volatility means less range from a low to a high, and we likely won't see these massive 70, 80, and more percent corrections like we have in the past. Bitcoin over the long term will continue to become more of a long-term asset, more of a buy and hold type scenario. But how do you guys feel? Do you think there's a different reason Bitcoin is holding up as it is versus the market? Do you think it's something other than Bitcoin being more mature? And where do you think MicroStrategy will end this year? Will they reach 1 million Bitcoin held? I suspect it's going to be closer to 750, maybe 800,000 Bitcoin, which is still an amazing feat. I suspect at some point in 2026, MicroStrategy will get to 1 million Bitcoin held, making it that much harder for the everyday person to accumulate Bitcoin. These companies, they will continue to hold. They will continue to make Bitcoin more and more scarce. And real quick, just before I go, I wanted to show you guys that Bitcoin on exchanges, it got awful close to its low point again. So in February of 2025, Bitcoin balance on exchanges reached 2.15 million, spiked back up to about 2.25 million, hit a low in March of 2.18 million, and started rising a little bit, but we are still so close to breaking this low point, this 2.15 million. When Bitcoin is in a clear uptrend again, when there's excitement again, we're going to see the Bitcoin balance on exchanges drop even more. It will reach a new low point, lower than 2.15 million. It will crack 2 million. Bitcoin is becoming more and more rare. Do not let these companies buy your Bitcoin because they will never let it go. Thanks as always for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.